Our conversation begins this morning with the burning economic issues at the domestic commodities market with the head of research at the financial derivatives company, Damilola Akibami, who's right here with us in the studio. Good morning, Damilola. Thanks for coming on the program.
Good morning, BC. Thank you for having me.
All right, now let's begin with the latest development in the crude oil market space. Okay. Now, of course, this morning Brent is trading at around $43 per barrel, and this comes as Nigeria plans to reduce offshore oil workers. What's the implication of all of this?
Yes, okay, so first of all, what's happening in the global oil market is because obviously the U.S. is, in some U.S. cities, they're imposing lockdowns because of the surge in infection cases, and there are concerns that this may actually outweigh the demand recoveries for U.S. gasoline demand. But obviously, market demand dynamics will continue to affect prices. And in Nigeria, why we're seeing a lot of international oil companies removing their workers from onshore and offshore rigs is actually because they're trying to contain the spread of the coronavirus, because working on the rigs is also like an incubator for the virus to spread. So that is what we're seeing happening, and it's not even just in Nigeria. At least I know Total, the likes of Mobil, also in other African countries, are pulling out their workers just in order to contain the spread. And for Nigeria, this has had a significant impact, because we know that even in June, the oil rig count dropped sharply to about 8 rigs, active rig count. So that just shows that exploration activities have declined significantly. And obviously, if your exploration activities decline, it means that production too will be affected. And Nigeria also needs to comply with its OPEC quota of 1.4 million barrels per day. So definitely, we're going to see some production cuts in the near term.
Perhaps this once again points to the need for the country to step up its diversification plans. For instance, now let's talk about a country like Gabon, yes, which saw its sugar output rise by 4% in the first quarter of 2020, and that's just as the price of sugar in Nigeria now sells for about 21,000 naira per bag. So what's the correlation?
Yes, so Gabon also, aside from oil, because it's also an oil-producing country, Gabon also produces sugar, and the government has invested a lot in the sugar industry, and they're targeting to increase the sugar production. And in Q1, obviously, in most African countries, the impact of the health crisis was not as severe, so they recorded an increase. But I'm sure when Q2 numbers are released, we might see a contraction. And the government has also planned to invest about $2.8 million in the sugar industry, just so as to boost production. And for Nigeria, what we're seeing, Nigeria also, we also grow sugar in this country, some sugar-producing areas such as Adamawa, Kano, Sokoto. So they're mostly in the northern part of the country. So we actually do have some sugar-growing areas, but Nigeria still imports a significant amount of sugar to meet the local demand.
And why is that?
Yes, it's just because local production is not sufficient. So local production is just about 6 to 8% of what we consume. So over 90% of sugar consumption is met by imported demand. And the government has actually done a lot of things to try and encourage local production. So ranging from increasing the import duty to levies on imported raw sugar and even refined sugar. We've also seen VAT increases. So these initiatives the government has tried to put in place just to encourage local production.
But is it yielding any results?
Well, it is to an extent, obviously not as quickly as we want. So for instance, in 2012, there was a sugar master plan that was released, and the government is targeting self-sufficiency in sugar by 2020. Definitely, we're still importing a lot. So that is yet to be achieved. But then we know that the likes of Dangote Sugar, Boa, and even Golden Penny under flour mills of Nigeria, these are some of the major sugar-producing companies in Nigeria. They're actually also investing in the production of sugar. We know that even the border closure that was implemented last year, that to an extent has helped domestic production, because it has curbed smuggling, which has been a major constraint to sugar production. So what this industry needs right now is obviously investment. I talked about Gabon, with the government investing about $2.8 million. We know that we need investment in the industry, obviously infrastructure development, getting the right techniques, and then land is a major issue. I mentioned the states that produce sugar in Nigeria, but again, the quality of land matters. So if the quality of land is not up to par, obviously yields will be affected, and that would affect productivity and output. Another major issue is irrigation. Most of the sugar-producing areas are in the north, and the level of rainfall is suboptimal, so you have to have irrigation facilities. And if this is not available, it will affect output. Insecurity is another major issue. So there are challenges definitely that are affecting the local sugar industry, but then there's still the upside there, because now we know that with the border closure, with the increase in import duties and whatnot, which is now making imported sugar more expensive, it's giving room for domestic production to increase. So that should actually support the local sugar industry.
But what about the fact that people are actually trying to stay away from consuming as much sugar, due to health reasons? Does that in any way also have an implication on the sugar industry?
Yes. So Nigerians are becoming more health conscious. Everyone is trying to watch their weight and whatnot. So, and obviously the health issue, diabetes and whatnot. So definitely that is a concern for sugar demand. But sugar can be used for so many other things aside from consumption. And in terms of, for instance, ethanol, sugar can be used in the generation of ethanol. And even in the master plan, sugar master plan I mentioned earlier, that is one of the objectives of trying to actually grow ethanol. So you can use sugar for so many uses. So fine, on one hand, consumers or people might not be consuming as much sugar because of health reasons, but you can use it to produce ethanol, which is a fuel which can also replace the premium motor spirit. You could also use it even in the generation of electricity. So there are various other uses for sugar.
So we need to look at the broader picture here. Now, yesterday, the National Bureau of Statistics released new data showing that over 50% of Nigerians are below the age of 20, and that average household size in Nigeria is about 5 persons per family. So if we're to look at this now, is this likely to have any effect on the demand for commodities?
Definitely, because clearly we have a young population, if a significant amount are below 20 years, and the demand or consumption pattern of a toddler, of a young child, of anyone below 20 is definitely different from a middle-aged person or an elderly person. So that definitely would affect the consumption pattern. Growing individuals, growing people need more protein and other nutrients compared to what a middle-aged person who might now be, because again, most Nigerians that are actually health conscious, they fall within that age bracket of the middle age and the elderly. So definitely you would see some changes in the consumption pattern, and it would affect commodity prices, because if you have the bulk of the population consuming the likes of more proteinous items like milk, meat, fish, and all that, and dairy products, definitely you will see the demand for those commodities increase, and subsequently their prices too would increase.
Now, where are we in terms of commodity prices now? Have they gone up, or have they, reduced with the rains that are here?
Oh, well, right now we're still in the planting season, although towards the end of Q3 the harvest season will start. So I think commodity prices are still relatively stable, they're high. So usually prices are sticky downwards. Even when output increases, the prices don't crash significantly like that. And with the rains and what have you, now that again interstate movement is now allowed, so that would improve the logistic constraint that we experienced earlier in Q2. So as more commodities are being moved from state to state, that increases the supply, and that should bring down prices. So that, coupled with when the harvest season commences, we should see prices subside.
I'm sure many are looking forward to that. Well, let's talk about the stock market now. Of course, that market has been largely negative in the past few weeks, and this has, of course, brought the year-to-date to minus 0.82%. But what direction do you see the markets in the coming days? And tell us what's even been responsible for these huge declines that we've seen.
Well, what we've seen happen in the domestic stock market, which is also similar to what has been happening globally, was obviously the health crisis, the heightened uncertainty going on in the markets, the shutdown of companies, or the disruption to trade and what have you. So what we saw was like most of these stock prices, stocks rather, they fell below, their prices fell below the market value. So obviously most of them are bottomed out. We should expect to see them start to increase. And also between May and June, that was the peak of the earnings season. So a lot of results were being released. So that also, the performance, though it was mixed, there were some sectors like banking sector that released some positive numbers, but the brewing industry was heavily affected, obviously, because the trade sector, the manufacturing sector were all affected by the shutdown and the lockdown. But now what we're seeing is, like, as we enter Q3 with the resumption and activities. Now flights have commenced. Now you can move from one state to another. So that pick up in aggregate demand, the fact that consumers, or rather businesses, can produce more, there's increased industrial activity. We should see that impact positively on companies' numbers. So Q3 numbers will be better, but Q2 numbers are going to be released now, obviously, because that was the peak of the shutdown. So the severity of the impact of the crisis will be very stark when the numbers are released. But I think between Q3, Q4, we should see a recovery. And it's not going to be smooth. Definitely, it's going to be uneven. Some sectors will recover faster than the others. The likes of, for instance, aviation that was contracting, definitely will now, as more people travel, although the numbers from yesterday were not encouraging, but as more people travel, definitely you see the aviation sector pick up. Banking, definitely, information and communication technology, those are sectors that have benefited from this shift to virtual work lifestyle and whatever. So those ones definitely would recover a faster pace of growth.
Well, let's dwell more on the fact that, of course, some airports resumed operations yesterday. And just like you mentioned, of course, we saw just quite a few passengers. Yes. But what would you see, what's your assessment of the development, especially as it concerns economic activity?
Well, yesterday was the first day, and just about maybe 4 or 5 airlines started operations yesterday. So it was not surprising to see that the turnout was low. And again, the market, everyone is looking at what is going to happen. Okay, how did the first day go? Were there protocols in place? Were they adhered to before? So once confidence builds in the aviation industry and people can see that, yes, indeed, things are being put in place, we can travel from one place to another. So definitely confidence will pick up and you would see increased passenger traffic. And that would obviously be positive for economic activity, like I mentioned earlier, because obviously logistic constraints are addressed, there's a better flow of output and demand would pick up. So in the long run, as long as there is no resurgence in infection cases, it should impact positively on economic activity in Nigeria.
And what about the impact on the Forex market? Now, of course, we saw the Naira resume trading yesterday at the official market at 381 to the dollar. Are we in any way seeing the effects of the unification of the exchange rate by the CBN?
Yes, we've started seeing the effect of the unification of the exchange rate, and that's why we saw that the official rate has been moved to 380, 381 from 360, and also even the turnover, Forex turnover, the investor and exporter window also increased significantly. And the fact that the CBN has done this or has made this move is sending the right signal to investors that, yes, the policymaker is serious about exchange rate reforms. Now, more importantly, is the supply of Forex, because you've addressed the price to an extent. So it also addressed demand because you're mopping up over 2 trillion naira. So obviously demand is going to be affected, but how can you boost your Forex supply? We talked about diversifying our revenue base, trying to get more sources of export revenue. So for instance, can we improve on our sugar production? What are all revenues saying and all that? So if you can boost export revenues, definitely with impact on your external reserves, and the CBN would have more buffers to support the currency. And as global economy recovers and we start to see remittances trickle in, diaspora flows trickle in, that would shore up our external reserves, coupled with the international borrowing funds that the government is trying to achieve. That should help to shore up the currency.
What about the parallel markets now? Because that's where most people will go. That's the first port of call for most people, you know, who want to have access to Forex. What's the state with the parallel market now, even if the CBN, even as the CBN is yet to resume sale to that market?
Yes, actually, most of the Forex transactions actually carried out at investor and exporter window, and the CBN doesn't actually acknowledge the parallel market as a legal market. But so far, the parallel market has been steady and stable at 461. And what we are foreseeing is that in the medium to long term, especially if your Forex supply improves, you should see a gravitation even of the Forex market, of the parallel market rate towards the IEFX rate. So we should see a convergence of rates between 380 to 400 naira per dollar. But right now, because they're still fine, we've seen that move to unification, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. And as economies recover, as the Nigerian economy also improves, and if our Forex supply also improves, we should see an increase in Forex supply, and then we should see a gravitation of the parallel market towards the IEFX fixed rate.
Well, what about power now? Are there any latest development in the power sector worthy of note?
Well, so far, one would expect that this is the rainy season and then power supply should increase, but that is not what we're seeing right now. In fact, power output has been below 4,000 megawatts since June 19. And what we're seeing right now is that also it's because of constraints. So we have grid constraints, we have generation capacity constraints. So that is still a major issue. And right now, we know that obviously the federal government has postponed the implementation date of the cost-reflective tariffs, the increase in the tariffs to at least Q1 2021. That also needs to be addressed because for you to attract investment into the power industry, the pricing has to be right. You have to be able to attract or incentivize investors to bring in their funds to invest in the market. So, but right now what we're seeing, one would have expected obviously there'll be increase in hydropower, but that's not what we're seeing right now. The constraints definitely surpass or outweigh what is being generated and distributed from the grid.
Now, let's touch on the oil market again, but this time around, I'd like you to give us projections where we're likely to see prices in the coming days. Are we likely to see it, around current levels?
Well, right now, all prices are trading like in a holding pattern because the market monitoring panel of OPEC and its allies, they're going to meet next week, Wednesday, July 15, to decide on whether they're going to extend the 9.7 million barrels output cut by maybe another month till August or to whenever. So right now, all prices are going to continue to trade around that level depending on or pending when the outcome of the meeting is released. So I think all prices will remain around the likes between $42 to $45 per barrel. Then depending on the outcome of that meeting, that would determine the trend afterwards.
Well, we'll see how all that goes. Many thanks, Head of Research at the Financial Derivatives Company, Damilola Kibabi, for coming on the program.
Thank you.